Here we have what I bet you all recognise is a Chaos Space Marine, or Chaos Renegade as they were known at the time of release. Now this piece of art is from the front cover of White Dwarf issue 99, if I remember correctly. It's really old, sometime around 1987 I think. Were any of you born then? Now some of you might find this offensive, but I myself prefer this old tainted and warped aesthetic of Chaos more than the current generic spiky Chaos. This tainted and warped, almost organic style that we were just talking about is sadly not so much of a thing with Chaos Marines anymore. I do wonder if it was because of the Tyranids coming along and taking on this biological mechanical style, and they didn't want a sort of aesthetic cross-contamination. The other option is they just didn't want to do it anymore. Now the Renegade Marine has what looks like another pair of fake eyes above his actual eyes. It looks a little bit like Mrs. Snakeworks when she wears her sunglasses on her head. Maybe they slide down to give him different viewing styles, like the Predator. Although this Chaos Renegade is a follower of the Ruinous Powers, which god in particular do you think he subscribes to? My guess would be Tzeentch due to the twisted mutations, but I'm interested to hear what you guys think. My name's Marcel, and this is Snakeworks. So then, today's big question is, which Chaos God would you follow? Maybe some of you already are following a Chaos God. If so, let us all know in the comments below. Okay everyone, raise your hand if you think you look odd. Oh hello there Mr. Space Marine. So I would assume what we're looking at here is a Space Marine of the Mark VI variety with a few extras, a few accessories if you will. In universe, they're known as Bionics. The Marine shown here heralds from a sadly unknown chapter. There are no chapter logos or heraldry to be seen, and there don't even appear to be any clues. If I did have to hazard a guess, I would say the Iron Hands, as they are known for being into their bionics. The little freaks. Now what I find interesting is that not only does the Marine have a bionic leg, but the leg appears to end in a caterpillar-tracked foot. Might just be a sort of plate, but my brain sees tracks. Maybe he stands on one leg like a flamingo and then drives around like an ice skater. I feel the Marine's right arm has been massively over-engineered. There's far too many bits and bobs on this. Maybe it can reconfigure into different appliances like a Transformer or the TX in Terminator 3, a terrible Terminator movie. It felt like a spoof or parody of itself. In the middle of this gentleman's torso, just below his neck area, is what looks to me like an upside down skateboard truck. I was hugely into skateboarding in the late 90s. I wonder if I still have any of the skills. Here we have everybody's favourite bird, Kez. I was today years old when I realised that Kez is just short for Kestrel. Was Kez a Kestrel? I think the movie Kez was a famous British movie, but I myself have never seen it. Have any of you? Would you say it's worth a watch? I think its biggest claim to fame is being Craig David's pet in that old Bow Selector TV show. So yes, Kez here looks to be pretty much a bird. A typical bird from Earth, but its face isn't quite right, is it? What is that? A cat's head? A monkey's face? Why does it look weird? Perhaps it's those bushy eyebrows. They're as bushy as Thufir's from Dune. It sounds like they are anyway.
Those sounds could be imitated.
Now I know it's probably supposed to be feathers, but the underside of Kez's wings look like the weird texture you get underneath mushroom caps. I think it's called a frill or a gill or something. I believe it's where they hold their spores. The front of Kez's wings, and I think this might be known as the leading edge, have an interesting serrated sawtooth look to them. Do you think they're hard and sharp, or just decorative? Would you dare rub it and find out? It turns out the actual name of this bird thing is a razor wing, and that name sounds familiar to me. Now I feel I've heard that term razor wing somewhere before. Was it the name of an old Forge World flyer or something? I think it looked like a spiky jet bike. I don't really know what to say about this. Whatever is this? I'm struggling with coming up with a way to describe what we're actually seeing here. I suppose I would have to say it looks like a weird bird with a strange shaped head that got run over by a steamroller or something. It looks flat. A bit like the ending scene from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So according to my sources, none of which are ketchup or salad cream, this isn't actually a bird or even an animal. It is in fact a plant. A plant you might have heard of, a brainleaf. I think we called each other that back at school in the 80s, you know, your brainleaf. Now what I find quite nice about this here brainleaf is that it hails from the planet of Catachan. I'm sure you all know about that one. Home of the famous jungle fighters and the infamous Catachan Devil. Seems like a lot of stuff comes from there. According to the fluff of this thing, it can actually fly. It would flap down from the tree, attach itself to the target, and then deposit some sort of spore where it would grow into another cordyceps style fungus. Now, it's two plants we've seen that act like this now. This is a bloody awesome piece of art depicting, as is quite common in these videos, Space Marines. So the Space Marines here appear to be up to their usual antics, fighting against the Orks. It looks like they're breaching some sort of Ork stronghold, base or fortress. Maybe it's a boarding action. The Marines again are from a chapter I cannot identify. I see no chapter logos or markings anywhere to give me a clue. Sometimes you can see a banner or something waving around in the background, but this time there's nothing, unless my eyes are deceiving me. If you reckon you know the chapter, then please let us all know. Now what I love about these old pieces of art featuring Space Marines are the old camouflage schemes they sometimes wore, usually in weird and wonderful colours. Although this picture's black and white, my imagination seems this as a sort of yellow, orange and black tiger stripe pattern. It's weird how the mind works, isn't it? Now it wouldn't be a fantastic piece of Oldhammer art without some sort of weird weapons in it. Well, this piece has a few. The main Marine is carrying what looks like it might be a flamer pistol, and the guy on the left is carrying something very strange. What do you think that is? A plasma gun? A disintegrator weapon perhaps? Who knows? The sentry weapon at the bottom left hand of the picture looks to me like one of the Adrathic weapon types that the Custodes use. I specifically remember those on the jet bikes. I think they look quite cool, a sort of rectangular barrel shape. So from what I can recall, Adrathic weapons are only available to the Custodes. I had the resin versions of some of them on some jet bikes I painted many years ago. Have they released anything like that in plastic yet? I don't think they have. What was it that young Anakin said? Now this is pod racing. Now this here robot looking chap looks a lot like the pit droids from Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I think they ran around poking each other in the nose and then they folded up when that happened. They had a life-sized one in our local HMV at the time. HMV in the late 90s and early 2000s was amazing, but it's so dry now. I don't think the pit droids had machine guns, but if they did, it would have been awesome. This one, however, does. I can't identify the weapon exactly, but to me it looks like an autogun of sorts. There were many versions of these back in the day. Now over the years, the Star Wars prequels, especially Episode 1, have had rather a lot of hate. At the time of release, they were certainly nowhere near as good as the original trilogy. However, after seeing the absolute travesties of The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, those prequels now don't look anywhere near as bad. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Now sadly, the new TV shows have all been a bit middling to me, with the exception of Andor. I thought that was very good. It nailed the tone and feel of the Star Wars universe, and it didn't make me feel like I was watching a CBBC kids TV show. If you haven't seen it, I thoroughly recommend it. It's great. It's 100 times better than all of the other ones. Now enough of that Star Wars talk for now. Let's get back to our art, shall we? So looking at the rest of this droid fellow, he also appears to have a Space Marine Mark VI shoulder pad, recognisable by the bobbly bit. Could this just be a Space Marine with a special helmet, do you think? This is an interesting looking contraption, isn't it? I think what we're looking at here is a spaceship, a weird spaceship of the Rogue Trader era. The aesthetic design of this ship is really rather interesting. I think it looks lovely. It's nothing like the design of things we see in the current Warhammer 40,000 aesthetic. So I suppose it does look a little bit like the Forge World Custodes vehicles, maybe. What are your thoughts? Now this spaceship actually reminds me a lot of the spaceship the boys from the Dwarf find in that old Red Dwarf episode where Crichton becomes human. The double Polaroid episode. I think it was called DNA. It was very good. Suppose you could also say this spaceship looks a little bit like one of the Tau flyers. Is it the Barracuda? I think it's the sort of rounded rectangle shapes going on. It's hard to describe an aesthetic design language. There's probably a proper term for that I don't know. The whole ship appears to be very clean, with no markings or anything whatsoever apart from one little area on the front of what might be a nacelle. There's a weird sort of mottled, web-looking pattern. It also looks a bit like blood vessels or something. What do you guys think that is? At the rear of the spaceship, on the top, is what looks like one of the tripods from War of the Worlds, except it only has 2 legs. Does that make it a bipod? A human's bipods. Anyway, I think it's the eye-shaped bit in the middle, giving me those vibes. I did enjoy the War of the Worlds movie starring Tom Cruise. I also enjoyed the 1950s version. I've also noticed there's a recent TV show on the BBC, I think, but I didn't see it. Was that any good? I like to ride my jet bicycle, I like to ride my bike. It's a famous song by Queen, you know. So do you remember being told that in Warhammer 40,000, jet bikes and other anti-grav technology is rare? Well, not in the days of Rogue Trader. Everyone had them, including the local riffraff, punks and pirates. Everyone and their granny had them. Our gentleman here riding past has what appears to be Mark VI shoulder pads on his shoulders. Do you think this guy is an ex-Marine? Or do you think perhaps he killed a Marine and took it? Perhaps he just printed out a replica on his 3D printer. What do you think? Our man is riding through what looks like some sort of Western-themed town. From what I remember, this town or planet is called Hell's Reach, and it's some sort of frontier town as it sits in the Eye of Terror and gets cut off from the Imperium by warp storms for years at a time. At least, that's how I remember it. I'm sure if I'm wrong, someone will let us know. There's a guy standing off to the left in the background that's carrying another one of those grapple guns we saw in a previous video. These look like some sort of portable Ursus claw weapon. Do they use them for climbing perhaps, like a grapple gun? Or is it just a nasty weapon? Maybe it's both. The building in the background on the left side of the picture looks like one of the turrets from the Death Star to me. It's just missing the laser cannon barrels. I always thought they were some of the cooler looking turret emplacements in sci-fi movies. One day, I intend on building one as a piece of scenery, a turret emplacement inspired by them for Warhammer 40,000. Pokemon, gotta catch 'em all. What's with all the songs in this video today, hey? I'm sure you're all well aware of just how much of a big deal Pokemon was when it came out in, 1999 or thereabouts? I was 18 at the time, so I was a little old for it. I do remember the Game Boy games being in the shop and the cards being everywhere. I somehow had a few, but my girlfriend at the time stole them. There was definitely a Diglett and a Dotrio in there. I think my greatest memory of Pokemon related events would be the release of Pokemon Go. Everyone was playing that. There was a Pokestop about 10 seconds walk from my house at the local church, where hundreds of people would just hang around. You would see people wandering all over the place hunting the little swines. It was really good fun, until it wasn't. All of a sudden people seemed to just stop playing. I think it's because the balls became less consistent and it became harder to catch things, therefore it made you not want to bother. I wonder if people still play it today. So what I've been trying to say anyway is that this thing, although looking like a maggot or slug or larvae or grub or whatever, also looks like a Pokemon. It's probably the proportions, and also its face. The face is really quite cute, isn't it? I do have to ask if that was intentional or not. It even looks like it's asleep. Pokemon always have interesting names. Well, the first generation did anyway. Things like Pidgeotto, Squirrel, Squirtle, and of course Pikachu. What do you think this thing could be called? Magaletto? Slugly? Grubby? You know, I think I have some old photos of myself and Mrs. Snakeworks out playing Pokemon Go somewhere. I might go and try and dig them out now. I imagine they'll look quite cool. Now, speaking of cool, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Peter. If you are enjoying the content on the channel, then please consider joining us on Patreon, the link to which is in the description below, or up here somewhere. This is a very bizarre looking beast, isn't it? Yet another Rogue Trader era monster. I know you guys love these. Along with a lot of other Rogue Trader era monsters and beasts, this one looks like a real world insect, a praying mantis, one of the coolest insects I would say. They actually sell praying mantis or manti in my local pets at home. I've seen 3 or 4 different species. Every time I see them, I have to admit I'm very tempted to buy one. They're about £15 each, which is impulse buy pricing. Luckily, you also have to fork out for a hutch, and I wouldn't want to pay for that. 15 quid all in, yes. 50 quid with a hutch? No thanks. And yes, I'm also aware hutch is probably the wrong term. When I was a lad, in the mid to late 90s, mantis-style kung fu was becoming popular. Not sure why. It was turning up in a few pieces of media at the time too. Street Fighter Alpha comes to mind, and that weird Sega fighting game where I think a lad has a skateboard. Was it Fighting Vipers or something, or am I getting mixed up? So usually these old beasts have some sort of weird name, like a Grox or a Catachan Devil, but this one doesn't. It has a more basic, boring name, and that is Giant Insectoid. Sounds a bit like an old B movie, doesn't it? Giant insectoids from space. Our buggy friend here has your typical exoskeleton that most bugs do. It might even be part of what makes them bugs, similar to chitin on things like gene stealers and the like. Also, I used to pronounce chitin chitin, but I learned my lesson. But at least I can pronounce niche correctly. A lot of people still don't. Also, let's not get started on Adeptus Arbites. Some wonderful artwork there. If you want to see some more Oldhammer artwork, and check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching.